What conversation or interaction with a physically normal stranger left you wondering if you just talked to something non-human or supernatural, like an angel, demon, ghost, alien, time traveler, etc.? Story 1. One evening in winter, I didn't leave work till almost 7 p.m., so I was walking home and thought, screw it, I'll cut through the park to get home quicker, even though it's really poorly lit. A couple of minutes into the park, I could hear a group of people behind me and in front of me, and I was thinking, crap, I'm going to get jumped. Up ahead there was a lamppost with a CCTV camera on it, so I thought I'll stop there, and at least I'll get jumped on camera. As I stood beneath this light, this really tall woman jogged over and stopped next to me. I was 6 feet tall and she was way taller than me. She asked me, is it okay if I walk with you? And I was like, sure, okay, I guess. She walked with me to the edge of the park, talking about how dodgy the park was at night. As soon as we got to the edge of the park, she told me to have a good night, then jogged back into the park. It was a really weird experience. I felt certain I would have been mugged or something if she wasn't there. I walked through that park every day for about a year. Never saw her again. Wow, she jogged back into the park. Definitely looking after them. Story 2. Back in 1997, I was aged 8. I shared a room with my younger brother, who was 4 at the time. We used to have our grandparents over for dinner most nights, and it wasn't uncommon for them to stay long after we had gone to bed. They would come and kiss us goodbye in bed when they were going to leave. This one summer's day, I woke up during the night and saw my granddad. It wasn't unusual. I said, hi, Granddad. Are you leaving now? He came and sat on my bed and said, yes, I'm saying goodbye for now. He kissed me and then went and sat on my brother's bed and kissed him as well. Then he left. My childhood intuition picked up that he was a bit sad. Next morning, I went into the kitchen to find my mom crying. She told me that my granddad died last night of a sudden heart attack. I said, how can that be? I saw him last night. He came and said goodnight to me. My mom said that my grandparents left shortly after I went to bed last night. They also remembered that my grandpa said goodbye and not goodnight. It was quite a shock, but at the same time a little comforting too. I don't remember a lot from my childhood, but this is a memory that I won't forget. This gave me the chills. I wonder if his brother saw the same thing when his mom broke the news. Story 3. Many years ago, I was working as a receptionist or secretary at a professional firm. One day, this guy came in, an older guy, thin, wire-rimmed glasses, had a German accent. The alarm bells went off. He never said or did anything inappropriate, but my skin was crawling and I couldn't get away from him fast enough. I ducked out to fetch the owner who would be meeting with his potential client. It wasn't a long meeting, and after the client left, I told my boss what I'd been feeling around that guy. He believed me, but couldn't relate as he didn't get any weird vibes from the old guy. Thankfully, we never saw him again. That has never happened again, and I often wonder what he did in his spare time to carry so much fear and negativity around him. Story 4. There was this kid I used to hang out with when I was around 8 years old, and it still haunts me. He wasn't from my school, and neither was he in the only other school in town. One day, he just showed up at the end of the school day and played with my friends and me, just like kids do. It was really nice, polite, clean, but he just seemed to have no family. He would never talk about his parents and avoided conversations about family. There was some sort of orphanage nearby, but friends who lived there said he didn't live with them. He was weird, but in a weird way. He was nice and fun, yet really mature for an 8-year-old. He had this emotional intelligence. He understood people and talked very well about others' feelings, but barely showed his. He had this strange aura. He would start really deep conversations that were oddly deep for kids our age. He also had a smooth voice. At an age when most kids have a voice that tempts adults to make them mute, one day one of my friends lost his grandma and he found oddly accurate words to reassure him. That scene is still in my head to this day. On the other hand, he knew no cultural stuff. Every film, cartoon, comic, and TV show, he wouldn't know. We showed him stuff like WWE, Dragon Ball, and other manga or anime, and he became a real fan. The only times he would act childish was when we wanted to know more about his life. He would answer funny and barely comprehensive things like some kids do. Today, I'm 100% sure he did that on purpose. I really looked up to him, although he was no leader or whatever. It was weird in a cool way, or cool in a weird way. At an age when a weird kid is just a weird kid no one wants to play with, he felt out of this world to me. My mother had a strange feeling about him, and years later I asked her about him and she told me that she couldn't do anything because he was so nice and polite. But to her, he wasn't a child and seemed really weird. He just hung out with my friends and me for about a year. I have great memories with him and I feel like he taught us much. One day he just stopped coming to play in our neighborhood, and no one saw him again. I have more anecdotes about him, and as time passes, more things feel wrong or weird to me. I have a deep feeling that I met someone too special or whatever. I'm not that much into supernatural stuff, yet I could start believing in a lot of things just because of this kid. There's always something up with kids who don't act their age. I hope they're doing okay. Isn't there a kind of dwarfism that makes a person look about that age their whole life? I wonder if they had that instead. Shh, here's a little secret for you. This video is sponsored by none other than me and my team at Rufus Rugs. We're the masters of creating custom, hand-tufted rugs that capture who you truly are. Whether you want to transform one of our intriguing thumbnails into a rug, for a friend, obviously, or you're craving a room makeover with awesome anime-inspired designs, we've got your back. Oh, and did I mention, each and every rug is skillfully handcrafted by me and my friends. No BS dropshipping gimmick here. You'll be blown away by your rug. Hit the first link in the description to learn more. Story 5. I was a sophomore in college. I walked into my math class like any other day and sat in my usual spot, about 4 seats in on the third row. Even though we didn't have assigned seats, there was always a girl sitting 2 seats to the left of me, empty seat between us, and her male friend to her left. They seemed to just be good friends, always laughing, never any reason to give me concern. This day in particular, I sat down, got my spiral and pencil out, and just quietly sat there looking forward and thinking about what I was going to do after class. Suddenly, I got this eerie feeling. I looked up to my left and my heart practically stopped. The girl was staring straight at me, blank face, and her eyes were shining like a bright, piercing electric blue, shining like lasers. Nothing at all natural. I can't explain it accurately. I was basically paralyzed and couldn't move or say anything. I eventually blinked and looked forward, then looked back, and the girl's head was turned back to her friend as he was talking again. About 2 years later, I was with friends and we were driving to a restaurant. Traffic was building up since it was rush hour and we're stopped in the right lane. I'm in the back seat and I happen to look up, diagonally to the left and through the windshield. I look into the car sitting in the lane next to us. Its back bumper is parallel to our front bumper so I can see the driver easily. He turned almost completely around and looked back at me, staring intensely. Even from that distance, I could see his eyes were that piercing, bright laser-like blue, and I froze again. Just like the last incident, I was eventually able to blink, look away, and then immediately look back. The man was turned forward. The light turned green and we all started moving forward. It's been about 15 years and I haven't experienced anything like that again, but it messed with my mind for a while. Story 6. I live in a small town in Central Europe, with very few black people around. I was pretty down because of a girl and went for kebab. While I was standing in a queue for kebab, in the pub right next to it, there was a woman that caught my attention because of 3 things. Initially because of her race that's just uncommon to see there. Another is the fact that I've never seen her before, despite living in a small town my entire life and going around this pub every day. Lastly, I noticed that she didn't order anything. She just sat there by the table alone. Then I ordered my food and while waiting for it, the woman leaned over the fence that separates the kebab place from the pub, looked directly at me, and offered me an ice cream. I accepted the offer and immediately after that she looked me in the eyes, smiled a bit and clearly, calmly said, "I love you." Then as I received my kebab, I turned around where she was and she was gone. Vanished as quickly as she appeared. I inspected the ice cream and it seemed okay and the package was intact. It was delicious. I would never accept food from strangers, but if they told me they loved me, I guess I can make a few exceptions. Story 7. I was working in Florida as a manager in a large chain of automotive dealers. I was on the service side and dealt with the customers who had the most difficult issues or were upset. One day an older man came in, and I went for a quick test drive to assess his concerns with the vehicle. He was calm and polite, a very easygoing person. After speaking for a few minutes, he asked me if I liked magic. He then proceeded to start talking about where I was from. He didn't ask a single question, he just began to talk. He narrowed down the area until he was within a 20-minute drive from the hospital I was born in. That hospital is an 18-hour drive from where that dealership was. After a few minutes, he said, "But you didn't live there very long. Moved south to that city, right?" It was absolutely spot on. Then he started rubbing his eyes and kinda humming. He asked me how long I had lived in Norway, then narrowed it down to the city I lived in for 8 years. At this point, I'm thinking he was some kind of weirdo who has done a background check on me, but how would he know where I had lived while overseas? He said, "Do you believe in magic now?" On the return drive to the dealership, I was running every possible scenario through my head. Did a friend set me up? How did he know the name of the city in Norway? When we arrived, he leaned over and said, "I'm just having some fun with you. I was in the CIA for years as a linguist. Now that I'm retired, I just use it as a party trick." He had me so confused, he honestly could have said he was some kind of psychic and I wouldn't have been able to argue. Story 8. This story is hard to explain, but I still get shivers when I think of it. It was a customer I was helping out. Honestly, there was nothing that really stood out with him. He was handsome, but in a normal way. He dressed normally, talked normally, was blandly friendly, as you are with strangers. Just a normal upper-middle-class type of guy. The only thing that really stood out was his blue eyes. Not in a goofy, supernatural type way, he just had very, very blue eyes. But for some reason, he made every hair on my neck stand on end. Alarm bells were going off in my head like crazy. All I wanted to do was hide. I have never felt this way, before or since, even when I was followed home by someone. I've never felt such gut-deep "you're in danger" as I did with this guy. After ringing him through, he reached out to shake my hand. This is not common at all here, but out of politeness, I took it and shook. And I instantly got so nauseous I almost gagged. The moment I got nauseous, he just held my hand and smiled. And something in that smile made me absolutely sure he knew what I was feeling and he enjoyed it. I'm not religious in any way, but I remember thinking at that moment, "Oh crap, is this the devil?" After he left, I was still so sick I had to go to the back and sit down. I'm not sure if he was a serial killer or what, but to this day, I have never experienced something even close to that encounter. I absolutely felt bone-deep certainty that I was in some sort of danger. I felt every bit like the prey. It's a hard story to explain because it's all based on feelings, so I haven't told that many people about it. But to this day, it is absolutely one of the scariest and weirdest things I've experienced. Story 9. My granddad passed away suddenly from old age. My grandparents were married for 70 years. Inseparable. Truly in love until the last. The whole family always said when one passes, the other will follow soon after. A few weeks later, my grandmother's health suddenly deteriorated and was hospitalized. One night she called the nurse over and said, "I think I'd like to go now." The nurse sat by grandmother's bed and held her hand as my grandmother slowly slipped away. That's true love. That nurse was a great person. Must have been comforting to have someone there when she went. It's also comforting to know that you've left a like on this video and subscribed to the channel. Do it. Story 10. Okay, this is creepy and weird. I had a similar encounter when I worked as a cashier at Walmart. I was the only one working a register, as it was later in the night. I had a line full of people and one supervisor close by doing her thing. I looked up and saw the sky about 2 or 3 people behind my current customer, and he gave me an instant feeling of unease. I saw this black fog-type aura around him. I have never seen auras of any type prior to this or after. I kept watching him through the corner of my eye and I could feel him just watching me. When I looked up again to take care of customer number 2, it was the weird guy instead. Even stranger was, no one else was in line anymore and I could no longer find my supervisor. The store was quiet. All I remember about this guy is he had longish brown hair, average height and looks, and the strangest blue eyes I've ever seen. I looked at him to ask what I could do for him, and before the words even completely left my mouth, he stated he needed a specific brand of cigarettes. The whole time he had this knowing grin on his face. When I turned away from him to get his cigarettes, everything went black. I couldn't see anything for what seemed like several minutes, but I'm sure it was only a few seconds at best. All I could think was, oh God, this man is in my head and completely messed with my mind. When I finally turned back to him, he just laughed this weird laugh like he knew what I was thinking. He looked at me again and just walked away. As soon as he was gone, everything went back to normal. The supervisor was back, a line full of customers again, all of it. I felt off for several days after this encounter and had nightmares about that guy's eyes following me and telling me he was always watching. Several strange things happened in my life beginning after my shift was over and I got home. Things quit happening when I stopped having nightmares about a week later. Story 11. My girlfriend had broken up with me. I was walking home crying. Out of nowhere, a younger-looking girl, maybe 3 or 4 years younger looking than me, comes out of nowhere and says, "Hi, it's dark and I'm alone. I see that we're going in the same direction and you've been crying. Should we make company?" I said, "Sure." I asked what her name was. She just replied with, name. Maybe later. Let's get to know each other first. Let's just talk." We had the most wonderful conversation. She was super insightful and had an answer to my every question and a comment to my every word. To this day, it has been my favorite conversation ever. We walked for blocks and blocks. As soon as I said, "Hey, thanks," I was super sad, but I'm not anymore. I felt super lonely, and I don't anymore. This talk has been incredible. She said, "Okay, this is my house." I asked for her name and she said, "No, it's not necessary to know that. Thanks for keeping me safe." She kissed me on the cheek and entered the house. I had lived there for 5 years and lived there for an extra 5 years after that. Had to walk very often by that house. Never saw the girl again. I'm pretty sure she was an angel of some sort. Well, he could have just knocked on the door and asked. The curiosity would get the best of me if I was him. Story 12. A little over 20 years ago, my friends and I went to a 4th of July party at the house of a guy they went to high school with. It started out pretty chill, but as the night went on, it ended up being the kind of party I didn't think actually existed outside of an 80s teen movie. A huge house in a rich neighborhood, a regard for property damage. Picture the party at the end of Weird Science, but subtract the mutant bikers and add a couple of hundred kids in their teens and early 20s, half of whom were on LSD and many of whom showed up with literal carloads of fireworks. At some point, these 2 guys showed up. Nobody knew who they were. They spoke to no one, not even each other. They didn't eat anything. They didn't drink anything. They didn't try to interact with anyone at all that I saw. What they did do was freak everyone straight the heck out. Visually, they were exactly average. Average height, average looks, average build, ambiguous age, ambiguous ethnicity. 100% forgettable. Except they absolutely radiated darkness and hostility. They would just stand on opposite sides of a room and glare angrily at each other for a while, then walk into a different room to glare angrily at each other again. They seemed to communicate with each other like that. Creepy as hell. It was like there was some kind of evil force inside them that was barely contained by their skin. If they walked into a room where you were, it felt like the air itself suddenly became oppressive. At some point, my friends and I dipped out to go check out another party up in the mountains, and a couple of people we knew took off to a different party in a town in the opposite direction of where we were going, and about 30 miles away from the original party. About halfway to our destination, we stopped at a gas station to get smokes and drinks. When we walked out, those guys were there. They were standing outside of their car, perfectly still, just staring holes through us. I don't know if I've ever felt that creeped out. We all piled out into our car in record time and peeled out of the parking lot. Thankfully, it didn't look like they tried to follow us, and we never saw them again. A few hours later, we went back to the first party to find a girl we knew sitting on the floor holding a baseball bat, jumpy as hell, ready to swing at anything that looked threatening. Apparently, those guys got way creepier after we left. Nobody would go into any detail though, so I never found out exactly what happened, but everyone who had stayed at the first party looked thoroughly shaken. The next day, I ran into one of the people that took off to the other party. Right about the same time we had our gas station encounter with the spooky twins, they had the exact same encounter with the same guys at a gas station probably 50 miles away from where we were. Meanwhile, the people who stayed at the first party swear those guys didn't leave the party until hours after we saw them at the gas station. It was all intensely freaky. I don't know who those guys were or what they wanted, but I have genuine doubts as to whether they were really human. Story 13. There was a young woman, about my age at the time, early 20s, sitting alone at a nearly empty coffee shop. She seemed like she was trying not to cry, so I went over and asked if I could sit with her. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing at the same time. She didn't go into detail about what was going on with her, but she felt like there was no hope. I did my best to encourage her, told her not to give up, tried to give her reasons to hold on, and thought of ideas that might give her a spark of hope. The coffee shop was closing. I wrote my phone number down and told her that I would love to hang out with her again, and she could call me anytime. She looked at me and told me that everything I said to her wasn't for her to hear. It was for me. I hadn't told her that I was in fact depressed. I'd originally gone to the coffee shop to think about how to best take my own life. While talking to her, I figured if I could maybe help someone else not to feel the way I do, I wouldn't end it all, at least not yet. She not only saved my life that day, but gave my whole life a new purpose filled with hope. I'm a therapist now. I help people all day. She hugged me, then walked out to the door. I ran after her because she forgot the napkin with my number on it. I was no more than 2 seconds behind her. I got outside and there was no one there. What a beautiful intervention. Right place, right time. Story 14. I was going through a really hard time at the time, and I was walking back home after getting something to eat alone at a local food court. I was standing at the traffic lights and I saw this guy kind of off to my right and got a weird feeling. Like he had an aura or something. A totally normal looking man, by the way. Anyway, a few minutes later, he comes up to me as I'm walking and said, "You have one of the kindest energies I've been able to see." And I'm like, oh God, is he trying to pick me up? Please leave me alone. But then he continues and accurately, like insanely accurately, tells me what's been going on in my life. As in he knows that XYZ thing is happening, but in a broad sense, like, I think recently you probably lost a family member close to you that you love. You had a falling out, but you need this to push forward, etc. When I clearly looked freaked out, he just smiled and said, "Yeah, I have a gift. People don't believe me, but it's a thing," and just wandered off. To this day, I'm like, did I meet an actual psychic or a stalker? Story 15. Not me, but a friend of mine. Was really sick with a flu and could barely stand. He sat down outside the pharmacy while they were getting his meds ready. The girl with bright blue hair sat down across from him and said, "You aren't looking too good." They had a weird conversation and he finally asked, "Are you a hallucination?" To which she replied, "Yes, but not one of yours," and walked away. To this day, he's not sure if she was real or not. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy what is the weirdest thing you have seen in a gas station night shift. Story 2 is crazy. See you on that video.